Hey, beloved listeners, we have a really special episode coming your way in a couple of weeks, but in the meantime, we wanted to send you some bonus content. I sat down with journalist Nancy Rommelmann to talk about what it's like to be in the middle of a food world controversy, as well as her views on food media and journalism today. We hope you enjoy it. Hello, and welcome to the Four Tops bonus audio content. I'm your host, Catherine Cole, and I'm joined today by journalist Nancy Rommelmann. Now, Nancy has written about food in the past, and this interview will be about food writing and food journalism, but also about free speech and how the food business and speech are inextricably intertwined. And with that, welcome, Nancy.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here with you.
Thanks for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, maybe we should start with your past as a food writer. Tell me about that.
Sure. So when I first started working as a journalist, it was in 1994. And I had a nightlife column in Los Angeles, where I lived at the time. And but and I was also writing like really super long features. I interviewed serial killer John Wayne Gacy and just like really chunky, sort of more difficult stuff. But you have to make money, right? And I thought, well, what do I like? And I was like, well, I like food writing, so maybe I'd dabble in that. Then I get a call one day from this woman that says, hey, this is Barbara Fairchild from Bon Appetit, and I've been reading your work, and I'd like to know if you'd like to go skiing for us in Sun Valley. It was literally one of those, like, who is this moments.
What a call.
But she had read my narrative work and just thought I had a good voice, and I wound up writing for Bon Appetit on and off, mostly travel pieces. They'd send me to these great places for about 10 years. I did some food writing in L.A. when Jonathan Gold went to Gourmet for a while. I took his column over at the LA Weekly, and it was just something I always kind of did. But the reason and when I came to Portland, moved up to Portland, I wrote restaurant reviews for Willamette Week, and I had a column in Portland Monthly. But the problem for me is that I never primarily considered myself a food writer. I was doing like really long features and articles and profiles, including like stuff that really, I really was invested in. But I kept getting known as a food writer. And I actually just at some point said I'm not doing it anymore because my first love was writing different kinds of journalism, so I kind of ditched.
Yeah, well, I mean, your work is hard-hitting and you tackle really, really difficult subjects.
Yeah, the things that tend to fascinate me, I have to just keep following the thread. So that's how that goes.
So what have you worked on recently that listeners should check out?
Well, I have been writing a lot for Reason magazine, and sort of having to do with sometimes with free speech or right now where people are not interested in other people having free speech. I've written several articles for them having to do with Portland, stuff that happened, for instance, the city council banning hate groups but not naming who they were, and then the big thing down by the waterfront between the Proud Boys and Antifa and everybody screaming at each other. We live in a very polarized environment right now where nobody wants anybody else to be allowed to say anything. And that's been sort of fascinating for me and a lot of journalists to cover.
And you've really experienced this personally in a way that intersects with the food industry. In exercising your free speech. Maybe if we can talk a little bit about, it was just about a year ago that you launched your video blog, right?
Right. That's right. About last December, another journalist and I in New York, we kept having these really long email threads about stuff we saw going on in the culture that we thought needed to be aired out. One incident was Asia Argento, who's an Italian actress. She was Anthony Bourdain's girlfriend. She'd been sexually assaulted by Harvey Weinstein, then went on to have like a 10-year relationship with him on and off. She really had become sort of the face of the Me Too movement, one of the faces of the Me Too movement. I'd written about her already. I'd interviewed her years ago. And then after her boyfriend, Anthony Bourdain, killed himself, it turned out that she'd had sex with a 17-year-old, and Bourdain had been paying off the 17-year-old, and then she denied it, and she, sort of got caught in a bad situation that maybe she should have fessed up to, but she didn't initially. And my friend and I were questioning whether she was really the best face of of Me Too. It's like you want to be able to have this incredible momentum, be able to fly straight, and we just didn't think she was, and so we talked about it on air. We talked about some other stuff. My friend had written about some of the heads of the Women's March who were deeply anti-Semitic, and that was problematic. So we talked about things that I didn't think that they were particularly controversial. I thought that they were pretty sensible and pretty data-based. But we live in an environment right now where if you are not sort of, well, according to some people, if you're not, on that party line, like you can only believe this way, and if you're not for us, you're against us. And some people in Portland decided that my views were very dangerous, and in order to make their beliefs known, went to the press about it, and decided the way to state their displeasure was to boycott and really slime my husband's business, Ristretto Roasters. And it was pretty effective in terms of really getting an entire city who, for 15 years, had really loved my husband's business and, never a problem, really family-owned. I never owned it. That was a mistake that they thought. And I thought that was really... I just wish people would come to talk to me, because that's what I do. I host shows, I interview people, and if people want to have a conversation with me, I open that door. Anyway, I've done a lot of writing about it. People can go online, they can go on my website and see what I've written about it. But happily, we all move on, and we go on to the next interesting phases of life and work with more information than we had, because when these kinds of things happen, you really try to sit and think, all right, so what was this really about? What is really animating people? And how do we have better conversations? That's what I'm super committed to, always in my work, and now probably more than ever.
Yeah, and it's kind of stunning. I mean, your husband, Din Johnson, is an artisanal coffee roaster, and he really just cares about high-quality coffee, and he had to close one of his locations. Did he lose his biggest customer?
Well, we had a location at Nikolai that the lease was up in a month, and the temperature was just so hot and so nuts that we just were like, let's just close this early. Wholesale definitely did flee, but one of the reasons was because, I know this only because of blah blahs, but the people that were angry, they called all his customers and said, you will drop Ristretto or else. Yeah. And that was a problem. People, believe me, I can understand not wanting to be in the middle of this stuff. It's not fun. It takes a lot of time. It's very stressful. But it was, a super unpleasant situation.
Yeah. Having
said that, Din is doing well, and I'm off to lots and lots of projects. And, these things happen and your life changes, but in many ways it's changed for the better. So there you go.
Yeah. But, what strikes me as interesting is if it were another, if you had this video blog and your husband had a different sort of business, like an accounting firm or an insurance agency, I don't know that this would have happened. I feel like right now, food and beverage are so much in the public eye that played a role.
Well, it's visible.
Yeah.
Okay, like if my husband had been an accountant, it's like, frankly, his clients would have been like, whatever. They're not the demographic that's going to get super worked up about this kind of stuff, right?
Right.
So you've got, who goes to coffee shops? Young people, and we'd had reading series, and it had been a very sort of friendly and social environment. So, they're going to try to hit you where you hurt. I mean, if they had come around and said, like, wow, Nancy's a terrible Frisbee player, like, I don't care, but they make sure that, it's going to affect you, and it's going to be public, because that's where sort of, I guess, the satisfaction. What really does make me sad, and I've talked about this a lot before, is that the idea that people will take pleasure in other people's suffering. I mean, seriously, Catherine, I just want to cry. It's like, this way is really lies madness. If you just think the way to move forward in the world is to make sure that people you don't like suffer publicly. I mean, everybody's doing this on the left and the right now. I watched the impeachment hearings today. It's not a good way to live, and I don't think it's a good way to live for the people who are proponents of it either. It's unhappy.
Yeah.
It's unhappy.
Yeah.
But yes, food, we do. I mean, look what happened in New York. That woman wanted to open the clean Chinese restaurant. Do you remember this?
Oh, remind me, or remind us.
Oh, gosh, it was about 10 months ago. And, I mean, I don't know a lot about the woman. It was a piece in the New York Times. She seemed sort of like a gal that had a lot of money that wanted to open a clean eating place. Okay, great, fine. But she chose Chinese cuisine. I don't think she was Chinese. Perhaps her husband was, and she was just destroyed. The first reason, because she wasn't Chinese. Like, first of all, you correct me if I'm wrong. Most chefs that I know or have read about are like, dude, you cook anything you want.
Yeah, I mean...
food is love.
And food there's always some sort of ethnic base to a cuisine, at any restaurant. And... yeah, rarely does the chef's ethnicity match up with the style of food they're cooking.
No, and why should it?
Yeah.
Food, it should be absolutely have a universal passport, and we take inspiration and we eat our grandmothers, our Mexican grandmothers pozole, and then we eat our Italian grandmothers or our Jewish. It's like, so then I'm allowed to only make what? It's just silly. It's like telling a novelist, like, well, you can't write a male character because you're a woman, or maybe I'm only allowed to write articles about women from Brooklyn. I mean, this is ridiculous. We have to be we have to be free to create, and food. I mean, food is so generous. I mean, to put what you're making in someone else and to have that communion, why would you want to limit it in any way?
You brought up the impeachment hearings, and this is sort of tangential, but it is interesting. As we're recording this, the big news yesterday was something overheard at a restaurant.
Unbelievable.
A phone call in which the president's voice carried so loudly that others in the restaurant heard, and that got me thinking about how restaurants, cafes, bars, they're public spaces, and they're also kind of like stages. It's almost like you're on a stage when you're in a restaurant, even though you go there to have a private conversation maybe with, your loved one or your friends. You're kind of out there and you're on display. And again, that kind of ties into, your experience with Ristretto Roasters. Not only are food industry people, do they get a lot of media attention, but even, just people going out to dine. If you go out to dine, you're out there and you're on display.
It's true, and I wonder, obviously some people are aware of that and they super like it, especially if you're going to some like fancy schmancy or whatever. It's this whole experience. I think though, and I would say I was a nightlife columnist for a long time, when you go to a bar, and probably the alcohol helps with this too, all of a sudden you really forget you're on display.
Right.
Like, it's like, yeah, I can, cry here in the corner or make out with some guy. Like, you kind of think it's so almost, it's almost camouflaging you. But it's really not. And, everyone's cell phones can prove that.
Yeah.
Meaning the videos on
Yeah.
the cell phones.
Well, even there was that famous instance, I think it was about 5 years ago, when Nigella Lawson was dining out with her husband.
Her then husband.
And he started to strangle her, and they were sitting outside at a prominent restaurant in London. And I just remember thinking at the time, it's so interesting, you go to a restaurant to have this private conversation, but everyone can see you. And
that was crazy. That also is just sort of testament to how people they get to this point where they feel that they're entitled to do things. I mean, can you imagine we go to a restaurant, you and I go to dinner now, and I start strangling you? I mean, first of all, it's absurd, but second of all, you and I would have to have had this relationship for years in order that I would feel like, well, it's okay.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay that I do this now because that's our dynamic. That was a terrible stuff. They're not together anymore, I don't think.
No, I believe not. No.
Yeah, no.
I sure hope not.
Saatchi.
Saatchi,
Yeah, the art guy.
Yeah.
Ew.
So how, in your opinion, how has food coverage changed since you were writing for Bon Appetit and writing for the LA Weekly?
Well, when I started writing, it was, I guess, pretty traditional or old-fashioned. There was a weekly column and people had a voice, and there were some people that were, like, I was always anonymous. I never, ever told anybody who I was. Even if I went on a trip for Bon Appetit, I would not, until I'd made my decision of who I already had picked and knew, then I would maybe tell the chef because we had to take a picture or something like that.
Right.
So, some people had more probity than others. The internet changed everything. And I think in many ways, cream will rise to the top, and you just will have this great and dynamic and crazily wonderful food stuff. Having said that, I still get an absolute kick out of reading someone like Pete Wells in the New York Times, especially when he destroys someone. I'm sorry, this is terrible. I don't believe in writing a bad review just because you want to hear yourself put some funny words in a row. That's so unethical. But there are two that I can think that he's done. One was the Guy Fieri, like 6 years ago, on about the Times Square restaurant. And listeners, if you have not read this review, go find it, or maybe they put a link.
Yeah, it is a classic of
It
food writing.
is so classic. And then what was the one he just did a couple of weeks ago? Oh, goodness gracious. I'll think of it while we're doing it. But it was another it's brilliant writing. So I have to admit, for me, like even when I was a nightlife columnist, it was always like people didn't really want to go. They just want to know. You want to take them on a little story. That's the kind of food writing I like. I want to go on a little story with you. I don't really care. You don't have to tell me about the 10 side dishes. I don't care. Though I really, if you could tell me about a great dessert, I'd be happy because I really like dessert. But you know, that's where you know video and photography so helps. They can really pull you into the story. But I have a question for you. So, you know when you go on and let's say you're looking up a recipe and you want to make, you know, gnocchi or something homemade, and you find a really cool site. But before you can get to the recipe, there are like 36 beauty shots. Do you find this a little annoying?
Yes, I find it incredibly annoying.
Yeah. I'm like, did I miss the recipe? Like, where is it larded in here?
Yeah, I think it's for SEO, for search engine optimization.
Yeah.
So that their photos will come up on searches as well if people want to do image searches.
I got it. Okay.
I could be wrong about that, but yeah, it's really annoying, and that's something that bloggers do that publications don't do as much. Usually on a publication's website, you can find the recipe.
Well, yeah, people don't have the patience, right? We're not diving down a hole for every recipe. You know, we just don't have the time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, so you've been spending part of your time in New York now.
I have.
So you're working in the media there.
I am.
What's going on? What's going
on in New York?
What's the
anyway?
pulse? Yeah, what's happening in media in New York right now?
I'm going to plug my book if you don't mind.
Oh, please do.
So I had a book that came out last year called "To the Bridge: A True Story of Motherhood and Murder," about a woman here, Amanda Stott Smith in Portland, who in 2009 dropped her 2 young children from the Selwood Bridge. I started writing that the day after it happened, May 23rd, 2009. And it was published last year. And even before then, I'd been spending a couple of months a year in New York. I'm from New York. My daughter lives there now. My mother's there. Media's there. My friends are there. And I thought, especially with the book, I was like, I'm going to just sort of move to a different stage. There's not a whole lot of media in Portland, and I don't think that's saying anything bad. It's just not the pulse of what's going on here. Whereas in New York, it's like I literally walk off the plane and someone's like, "Oh, come on my TV show in the morning." It's just like bingo.
Yeah.
And I am there. I am part of a new media company that's starting up. It's going to be online only. It's going to be journalism and podcasting and video, and we've got some super interesting, super dynamic people, many already working at the top of their game. I can't talk about who they are right now, but hopefully next year at this time, it will be up and running, and it's really exciting.
Well, it's great.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So kind of a happy ending to really uncomfortable.
Change is hard, Change is hard. There's post-traumatic stress and there's post-traumatic growth, right? And some people do one and some people do the other. It's just been an interesting year where you're forced to look at things and then say, oh my God, look at all these opportunities. That's what it's been like for me. So I'm super excited, and I've met there's an amazing group of people out there in the world right now. The Barry Weisses of the world and Katie Herzog, who's up at Rights for the Stranger, who are just kind of refusing to be part of either side shouting, just trying to be not reactionary, have some humor, keep doing good work, give people the cold take. And I think I really landed kind of in the middle of all this stuff because of what I went through, and I couldn't be happier. So
That's good to hear.
yeah.
Well, thank you for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to do it.
The Four Top is recorded in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon, and presented by OPB. Izzy Kramer is our producer, and Keelan King, our editor, also composed and performed our theme music. Stay tuned in a couple of weeks for our special episode recorded for a live audience at the Assemblage Symposium. Bye-bye.